How you gonna walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep. How are you gonna walk through the world? So easy to screw it up. You gotta rise like the sun does every day. Rise up, look above. The light feels something like love. Hello friends, I'm Shelley Leedahl, a multi-genre writer in lovely Ladysmith on Vancouver Island, and this is Season 3 of my literary podcast, Something Like Love. I've always been wild about exploring, so I'm feeling the pain during these restrictive pandemic times, and thus am dedicating Season 3 to travel and exploration. You're warmly invited to join me each week on international adventures via my poetry, fiction, and essays. I'll share some Canadian locales too. I also promote other writers' work, and because I just can't help myself, I add a dash of music to the mix as well. No passports required, no quarantine necessary. Let's just do this. Today, we're Portugal bound. I was there in 2013. Feasible because I'd arranged a home exchange with a French couple. My then partner, Greg, and I flew to Basel, Switzerland, where Chulita and Elaine met us and drove us back to their lovely home near Belfort, France. We had 2 nights with them, and then they flew off to Canada, while we settled into the Alsace region of France. And by God, it was glorious being in that wine region. Germany and Switzerland were close by. We zoomed to Paris on the TGV. We connected with writer friends of mine in Germany's Black Forest, and we luxuriated in a Baden-Baden spa. We visited my sister-in-law and niece in Switzerland, and we popped over to the Czech Republic for some exploring there, too. Among the many highlights, Colmar, France, La Petite Venice, and visiting wineries and running in the French countryside to the next village for morning croissants. I'm terribly fond of Europe, truth be told. We wanted to end the trip on a particularly hot and sunny note, so at the tail end we flew to Lisbon and then down to the Algarve. We'd planned some of our vacation based on travel writer Rick Steves' recommendations. As luck would have it, we actually ran into Rick in a train station in Prague. We spotted him and I said, "I think that's Rick Steves." Greg walked right over to him and said, "Hey, are you Rick Steves?" Yes, he was. And he was extremely pleasant to talk to, just as you might expect from his travel videos. Anyway, to Portugal, a few days of exploring Lisbon and a short train ride to a nearby beach town, Estoril. I can do beaches for about an hour or so, but I really wanted to walk and discover the place. So I brought Greg the beer he'd requested, then left him on his beach towel among hundreds of others. I wanted to walk along the coastal promenade to the next town, lively Cascais, with its grand mansions, gorgeous parks, and busy fishing harbor, and said, "No matter what, Greg, please don't move from this spot so I can find you again." I adored that 3-kilometer walk along the seawalls and rocky outcrops. Hours later, the sun was dropping low in the sky, and I was ready to return to Estoril with my souvenir apron and tea towel with roosters embroidered on them. As I got closer, I could see that the beach was still quite full, but what the hell? No Greg. I looked everywhere on the beach, where he had been, where he might have gone. No sign. And he had our train tickets back to Lisbon, and it would be dark before long. As panic began to rise in my throat, a police paddy wagon came toward me and 2 serious-looking officers got out right in front of me. "Are you Shelley Leedahl?" "WTF?" I could see Greg in the second seat of the vehicle, wide-eyed in terror. Yes? Can you prove who you are? Well, no, I couldn't. I didn't have my passport on me, and I didn't have any photo ID with me either. The panic was definitely increasing. Then I had an idea. I asked if I could use one of the officers' phones to punch in the link for my Writers' Union of Canada website, and voila, I proved who I was. Thank you, Twuck. Just one more reason to keep up my membership. Get in, the officer said, and I hustled in beside Greg, who shook his head and put a finger to his lips when I asked what the hell was going on. What had he done? He wouldn't speak, and as we weaved out of Estoril and sped back to Lisbon with that siren blaring like this was an episode of Starsky and Hutch, that's a 1970s reference for my younger listeners, we were raced back to our Airbnb in the Alfama, the oldest part of hilly, beautifully tiled, cheap-wined and San Francisco-style trammed Lisbon, and tremorously produced our passports. Turns out it's illegal to drink on the beach at Estoril. That was the issue. We were given a very stern talking to and warned to never travel anywhere in Portugal again without having our passports on our person. Greg wasn't charged, and a few days later we were on a bus down to the Rick Steves recommended port town of Salema. That's one travel story from Portugal. Now here's another one. This is an essay, What I Learned About Life at the End of the World, and it appeared in my book, I Wasn't Always Like This, published in 2014 by Signature Editions.
There's a big hard sun beating on the big people in this big hard world. There's a big hard sun beating on the big people in the big hard world.
For the first few hours, I thought her name was Sigrid. It is Sigrun, and we met in the coastal village of Salema, Portugal. The fit 62-year-old Dane has lived in Salema, a particularly brilliant jewel in the 200-kilometer-long treasure box that is the Algarve, with her husband Jorn for the last 13 years. Together they managed Pension Amare, the privately owned guest house that sits like a blue-trimmed crown on the hill above the bus stop, a mere hop, step, and long jump from the sprawling white sand beach. A few fishing boats bob on the Viridian Atlantic. They're all that separates this southwestern tip of Europe from Africa. Sigrun and Jorn no longer oversee Amare, but it was our good fortune that they happened to be filling in for the current manager during part of our stay. Guests in Amare's Sans kitchen suites are served breakfast in the communal dining room. The windows open to shocking sunshine. A constant breeze keeps temperatures variable in this small fishing village. Whitewashed townhouses, an abandoned and almost finished condo complex, restaurants and small businesses stagger up Salema's hillsides. The steep slopes are bisected by cobblestone lanes. Only the brave or the foolish actually flip-flop up and down. We had booked an Amare apartment with a kitchen, but on the morning of day 2, I crashed the communal breakfast scene in a sheen of sweat. I was glistening from a 90-minute walk/run and ecstatic about the secret beach I'd discovered, the challenging cliff I'd climbed, ecstatic really to be alive, and the water cooler called. A few guests were enjoying cold cuts, cheese, and croissants, including Eystein, the young Norwegian who'd welcomed us to the guest house upon arrival. The key's probably in the door, he said. Ours was. And sure enough, we were agape at the view from our balcony. Aquamarine ocean, long sheltered beach, an artful display of palms, cacti, and other exotic to us vegetation. We would have 5 nights in this Rick Steves recommended guest house. The amiable Seattle-based travel writer and TV host whom we'd coincidentally and delightedly met in person at the IP Pavlova metro station in Prague, A framed photo of him hangs in a local grocer's store, the same shop where I was told that if I didn't have enough money for my items, I could make up the difference later. In the dining room, I filled my water glass and apologized to Jorn for my profuse sweating. "Don't apologize," he said, "it's natural." Then Sigrun introduced herself and asked if I would like to hike with her the following day. If so, I was to be at her house at 8 a.m. My partner was also welcome. I did not even consider refusing. G hesitated only a little. I am a fast walker, and after 20 years of running and early menopause have become a slow runner. G is a slow walker and a fast runner. We agreed to meet in the middle as we left for Sigrun's house, just a few kilometers away. She was ready. Her wiry little dog, a Portuguese rescue, was eager to get going too. The three of us set out westwardly at a good clip, and were soon on a broad hilltop overlooking the salt-shaker village of Figueira. Wind turbines wavered in the hazy distance. I wanted to get a sense of this particular place. I wanted to know everything. Was that aloe vera or agave? Agave. Were there snakes here? Yes, but it was the scorpions you had to be careful of, the smaller ones, not the large ones. What was it like to manage holiday rental apartments? Sigrun ironed sheets, enough said. The capital is a 4-hour bus ride from Lagos, itself about 25 minutes via local bus from Salema. My introduction to Lisbon had been a happy one. We'd just come from there and found it magical, a sort of European sister to San Francisco with its hills and trams, its ocean and disparate personalities. It was vibrant, historic, and had an easy-to-navigate metro system. I imagined Sigrun visited often. I was last there in 2004, she said. Ah, my new companion was a singular woman indeed. Sometimes we walk silently, as serious walkers often do. One must allow time to take it all in, without comment, without feeling the need to converse. The popular expression is to live in the moment. This is when you hear the wind and note the scuttle of insects and reptiles in the dry grass. Colors announce themselves and beg comparisons. The cliff red as new potatoes, the sky enlarges, as does the sea. You feel the earth beneath your feet and become aware of the shapes of stones. After a time, Sigrun said, "Soon we'll be at the Roman road." We turned south off the road that leads through Figueira and continues all the way to Sagres, 2,000 years old, she said. I imagined togas, sandaled Caesars and Helens ghosting next to me. "What about that?" G asked, motioning to a stone wall that seemed to have no raison d'etre. "No," Sigrun said, "that would be more recent." Recent, here, could translate as hundreds of years old. Canadians that we are, G and I must often remind ourselves of that. "This is like Eden," I said, noting the lemons that hung like tasty decorations on the trees. We climbed down. "Wow," G said as we took off our shoes on the boulder-strewn and batherless beach. Camel-colored sand. Someone had left a boogie board, apparently for communal use. Among many of the couples I know, one partner loves nothing better than to spread a towel on a beach and stay for hours, and one can hack that for about 25 minutes. G would be back to this beach before day's end. "No one here yet," Sigrun said. "No nudes." I asked if she ever came to this beach to swim. She shook her head. "I'm an old nurse. I prefer people with a few clothes on." We made our way home via the cliff and learned where a large, flat rock, partially hidden in an alcove of bushes, overlooked the ocean and would be, as Sigrun said, a great place to watch the sunset and have a glass of wine, if you're feeling romantic. I had finished all my water, and G's was gone too. A shower was going to feel divine at the end of this day. Before we parted ways, our new friend asked, "Do you want to hike with me to Sagres tomorrow? It's a long one, but so beautiful. You'll need to bring a backpack with food." I had planned to visit Sagres the logical way, via bus. I wanted to see where Prince Henry the Navigator set the courses for explorers during the Age of Discoveries. One couldn't be this close to the end of the world and not actually experience it. I also wanted to go on an exploratory run with G the next day, but I knew he would be in beach mode for the rest of the holiday. "Okay," I said. "Sure." "We'll leave at 8 again," Sigrun said, "before it gets too hot. It would be 17 kilometers or so. I'll take a phone," she said, "and Jorn will pick us up." Considering the challenging terrain and the heat, I expected we might be back by noon. Still lots of the day left for myself. This was important because I'd been hoping for some kind of epiphany on this trip. I'd turned 50 a few months earlier, and after 3 decades of full-time writing, 10 literary books that caused little to no stir, some recent wrenching sadness, and a family that was fully independent and far away, I felt I'd arrived at that mythical, undesirable, ennui-ridden place, the crossroads. Portugal, I hoped, would deliver me. "Thanks," I said. Then Sigrun took the trail back to her home among the trees, and G and I scuffed down the hot streets of Salema back to our apartment, where we grabbed large handfuls of grapes and washed them down with white wine. We didn't go to Sagres. We went well beyond. We hiked without the dog, too far for him, and without G, too far for him, for 8 hours, with one stop to take a little bread on a plateau, one coffee in a just opening for business cafe several beaches from Salema, and 2 Diet Cokes, me, and 1 coffee, Sigrun, at a tourist-packed restaurant in Sagres with a killer view of the water. One learns much about one's companion during a day-long hike, and I realized that this is what I love most about travel, meeting the interesting people who are put in my path. Sigrun and I shared stories about our families, our work, and the meat of our lives. Joys and regrets were covered, hopes and fears. After one breathtaking from here to eternity beach after another came into distant view, then fanned out beneath us, then slapped beneath our feet, I was reminded that sometimes we are more open with strangers than we dare to be with longtime friends and family. Sigrun told me about her childhood on the Faroe Islands and how hard her young widowed mother worked to raise 5 children on her own. My hiking partner delighted in her single grandchild, Ida, who lives in Copenhagen. Sigrun showed me where she had watched fishermen struggling to haul a giant Portuguese man-of-war into their small boat. A vessel dwarfed by the lethal creature, she cursed the young hippies who did their business along the trail and left it, rather than digging a latrine and burying it. "I've stepped in human shit," she said. "It was awful." At one stretch we had to beware of the shepherd's dog, a large one, Sigrun said, and very threatening. We carried rocks in our hands, but there were no signs of the sheep, shepherd, or Beowulf. For a brief while we linked into an actual marked trail, the Via Elgaraviana. "I prefer to make my own way," Sigrun said, and I understood completely, even if it meant occasional backtracking and the odd admission that one doesn't have a clue where one is. Terrain is rarely static. Paths grow over, flowers die, colors change. At one point, past Sagres, I realized how burned my shoulders were and slipped my long-sleeved running shirt over my tank top. I felt like a pillar of salt, like a cowlick, almost completely wasted and dry as the skull of a coyote. It was an extensive, arduous, desert-scorching, tangled, slip-sliding, scratch-and-burn way to the end of the world. The rewards were the vistas, that blue water that turned to turquoise, turned to green, and at times became translucent. It made me want to lie down and die in it, or at least rest for a year or two. The rewards were the conversations. Before we reached the lighthouse at Cape St. Vincent, the true end, historical Sagres, is a teaser, as it is the most southwestern tip of Europe. Sigrun dialed Jorn and said we were already there. A small lie, but one that put us into double-step mode for the last few kilometers. And how amazing, way out there, to see a kid on a longboard. How anachronistic to learn that we could buy a beer at the end of the world, or a postcard, or a hippie dress. Who were all these people? Sigrun pulled me away from the souvenirs. I only wanted to look, and she said, "Out there, that's what really matters." The cliffs dropped 75 meters, almost straight down to the broiling Atlantic. Imagine climbing into a ship not far from here, waving goodbye to your loved ones and setting out for brave new worlds. Imagine the bracing wind as land disappeared and waves rocked your vessel senseless, sails slapping so loudly you had to shout to the man right next to you. I had Sigrun take a few photos of me against the royal blue ocean and sheer cliff landscape, my hair whipping around my head like Hydra. Some fools went right out onto the cliffs for photos. "Do many die?" I asked Sigrun, while I watched a tourist balance precariously. A gust of wind, a slipping rock. It would be fast. She said that fishermen climbed out on the cliffs and embankments all the time, and yes, there were deaths. It had been a long day, a tremendous day, and now Jorn was coming, and somehow it seemed right not to linger too long at our destination. It felt like looking at the sun or witnessing a miracle. Maybe they're the very same thing. I was burned and nicked and bleeding about my legs. I could have drunk my weight in water. And I became philosophical out there on the promontory among the other tourists and the fervent wind. It seemed that the long hike was an apt metaphor for life. You struggle, you rest, you thirst, you are sated, you are grateful. You do it all again. That piece is in my book, I Wasn't Always Like This, and if you enjoyed it and wish to read more of my travel essays, you can easily find the book online or order it through your favorite local bookstore. My longtime friend, writer Jerry Hill, has also written about his time spent in Portugal. Jerry lives in Regina, Saskatchewan, and he's recently launched his 7th collection of poetry called Crooked at the Far End. Jerry's graciously sent a recording of one of his Portugal poems. This is Love Poem Contest, 2nd prize.
Where the sea sings its rapture at the shore, we love. In the wooden ecstasies of trams, we love. The tiny wheels and curved track, and the one long arm that draws the charge. 3 women under one umbrella in wide sunglasses, though skies are dull. These women in the dark coats and silk scarves we love. The dogs for whom love is water we protect with our love. Ascending any staircase, with a key to any room we love, in our single beds, secrets of our bodies we love. Hands, eyes, the middle, or should we say depth, even death of night, no sound from the street but traffic of screams we love. Potatoes near our plazas we love, knowing these treasures, like love, will be consumed. Square-headed stones underfoot we love, numerals and letters of license plates, children calling from inside their walls, all bells, all cathedrals, spires and domes, all prayers we love. We still and always love the tender fits language endures, lost souls asleep before the gate. Smokers in doorways lighting the streets with brief flames we love. Every time a poet forgets a word or turns away, refusing, we love. The sweetness of view, the gaze upon the city, on every street we love again, all the way to the sea.
How are you gonna walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep.